You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to episode 51 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. Connect with us on Twitter at SMNP Podcast or visit our website, socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all, got a great episode lined up for you today. I'm going to be speaking with Matt Compton. He is Director of Advocacy and Engagement at Blue State Digital. And if you haven't figured out already, I love talking to these digital strategists, whether they're on the right or the left. I love hearing about how these guys tick. And Matt has a stellar background. He's previously worked as Deputy Director of Digital Content for the Obama White House, Digital Director of the Democratic National Committee, and Deputy Digital Director for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. And so Matt's built up this breadth of experience in digital communication, digital campaigning, advocacy, and what we really focus on in this interview is one of Matt's specialties, which is email drives. And we get into why email drives are important to campaigns, how social media fits in with an email drive. And then I started picking Matt's brain about how it was to work for the Obama White House during this really pivotal time in presidential communication. The @POTUS account was established, Instagram came about, and as we all kind of know, Obama was a very tech-savvy president. And we also discuss what to look out for in the 2018 U.S. congressional elections, which are in November, but the campaigning is well underway already. So let me cut to the interview. My guest, again, is Matt Compton, Director of Advocacy and Engagement at Blue State Digital. Matt, thanks for taking the time out. Welcome to the Social Media and Politics podcast.
Thanks for having me. So glad to be here.
So let's start out by talking a bit about your background. How did you get into the digital side of politics, and what work have you done in this area so far?
So I moved to Washington right out of college, and I didn't know what I wanted to be. I had no idea what my career trajectory would look like. And the very first job that I got in my career was working for a think tank. I was hired to be a copy editor. It was my job to fix comma splices and check sources and print out reports so that every legislative staffer on Capitol Hill could hear our best and brightest ideas. Because I was the newest person on that team and because I was the youngest person on that team, I was assigned to do some of the stuff that other people weren't interested in. And in the case of this particular organization, that meant the internet. So it was my job also to get the policy reports on the website and to manage the newsletter. But because that was mine, because I could own it, it was really a chance to sort of dive in and try stuff. And so I learned a little bit of HTML. I then began experimenting. Tried to figure out whether I could write a better headline for the posting on the website and get more people to download the report, or whether I could, change the intro text to the newsletter just a little bit and get maybe more people to share it around. And eventually I was, getting us started on social media and editing our podcast and really, really sort of beginning to get a fundamental education in what was then a pretty nascent field, online media as a, area of as a discipline, I guess. And I had a background from campaigns. I'd done a fair amount of that in college. And I was at the organization. I was at the Progressive Policy Institute for 3 years. And the 2008 election was heating up. And I knew that I needed to get back into the electoral space, that I wanted to have the opportunity to do something to have an impact on the November election. So I started talking to an organization called the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. They still are, the sort of official campaign arm of the Democratic Party focused on electing state legislators all over the country. And they were hiring a communications director. And traditionally, they'd been very, very sort of straightforward about this. They wanted someone who could come in and talk to reporters and prep their chair for interviews and, make sure that the press releases went out on time and all that sort of stuff. And this job still required someone who could do all of that. But they looked at the landscape. They sort of recognized that there were fewer state house reporters than there once were, that there was in 2008, a community of bloggers and online activists who were suddenly very interested in what was happening in the States. And they also sort of recognized, like watching what was happening in the Democratic primary, that there was also probably a community of people who would be interested in some small dollar fundraising if they only could build the sort of infrastructure and the sort of message plan to capture those people's attention. And so they wanted someone who could help them build an online program too. And when, by this time at the think tank, I'd begun to develop some of that traditional press experience. I'd been there long enough that, I was occasionally writing op-eds for our CEO, and I was, talking to reporters and inviting them to come into policy briefings. So I had some of that background, but the competitors that I had for that job at the DLCC were a bunch of, traditional press secretaries from Capitol Hill who couldn't decipher even the first line of code, and me, who actually was running an email program, even if it was a small one, and regularly, uploading and changing stuff on the website. And I think that sort of combination of skills made me unique in their eyes. And so that is how I made the transition back to the political space.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. You're sort of, I'm thinking 2005, this is right when sort of Facebook is starting its up and up. And so you have a little bit of this more traditional type of press release aspect and then moving that into email. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And that's what I wanted to ask you about, kind of structuring the show around email programs, because it's something that's kind of, we haven't really talked about on the show. Why are email drives important to campaigns?
So the best campaigns, they think about how to talk to their supporters holistically. And there are a ton of ways that we sort of really anticipate or try to build out programs that meet people where they are. But email has been and will continue to be at the heart of that work because it has a couple advantages over some of the other channels. For starters, it offers the opportunity for long form. You can make an argument in full. You can provide all kinds of supporting multimedia or rationale. You can use language to sort of state your case and then make a direct call to action in a way that sort of catches people's attention. It offers the opportunity to really, really, really quickly and efficiently A/B test, which is tough to do on some of the other channels. And for better or for worse, people have an attitude around email where it is a place where they go to get some business done in their daily lives. And so, maybe that is as simple as clicking on an advertisement from a retailer that lands in their inbox and then doing some business, buying something. And so they're not afraid to, replicate that experience on a campaign that's asking them to contribute. Or maybe it's more serious. It's an email from your boss asking you to whether or not you can make a meeting. And so it's not that hard to make the bridge from there to will you sign up for a volunteer shift? Email is a place where campaigns can get people to take action. It's a place where they can make sort of long form arguments to their best supporters and really develop a narrative over time because it's a little less ephemeral than some of the other channels. Right. It doesn't go away as quickly. If you don't open that email, it sits in your inbox for a while. And if the life cycle of a tweet is a few seconds, then email can improve on that even at the margins and still have a sort of a longer shelf life.
And I'm thinking also in terms of revenue, because there's a lot of, or the cost involved, because there's a lot of, discussion around targeting. And I guess that adds up over time. Is email cheaper on the whole?
It depends on a lot of different things because, to reach people at scale, you're going to have to invest something. And maybe that is just a human talent cost. To run an email campaign of any sort of significance, I think you need to have a couple people dedicated to it. We joke, I'm talking to a friend who is moving into a new job and going to hire an email team. And, emailers should come in pairs because you need someone to, check the work and make sure that everything has been set up correctly and sort of hold each other accountable. And so that is not something we should dismiss in terms of, ROI and costs. But the marginal cost of sending a message to millions of people is fairly low. It's pennies, and to reach the same audience on other mediums, whether that's a piece of direct mail or whether that is a TV ad, or sometimes even, some online ads, the costs can be higher. A tweet is free, but as we said, it goes away in an instant. And you have a great deal more control over who receives your message over email than you do over, say, an organic Facebook post, where the algorithm is sort of determining who in your audience actually will see it in the newsfeed. And so, dollars and cents, it can be tough to really sort of quantify the answer, but in general, I do think it's like an efficient, low-cost mechanism for reaching people at scale.
And if there's anything I've learned from talking to different campaigners and digital marketers, it's that, especially in a political campaign, you're using all tools available at your disposal. So you have email and you have social media. And I want to ask, are these relatively independent, or are they sort of brought together in some ways? Is one feeding off the other?
The best campaigns, the best groups of activists, the best advocacy organizations, honestly, the best retailers and brands, I think they think about this holistically. And they think about a multi-channel approach that nudges people, sort of throughout the course of their day. Maybe they get your email first thing in the morning. They see a tweet from your organization as they take the subway in to the office. They see a Facebook ad as they sit down for lunch. They get a text message from you as their day wraps up, and they're watching a video from your campaign's YouTube channel, or your group's has uploaded to Facebook after they sit down after dinner. So I think we shouldn't think about these things as sort of siloed off. I think we should build out a sort of cohesive message that can work across any of those channels. And you need to adapt what you're saying to the sort of constraints of the medium, what they are, whether that's like length, or whether that is the way to use imagery or video or whatnot. But the story that you're telling should be consistent, and the thing you're asking of supporters, the sort of theory of change, the like shared value proposition that it convinces them to buy into your mission and be part of your work, that is channel agnostic. That is a thing that should be at the heart of whatever you're doing, regardless of what particular send button you're hitting in any given moment.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I would also assume that you would take, on the one hand, that's kind of pushing content out, but on the kind of back end and getting that data.
Yeah.
So you have, one of the reasons for targeting is to see who's responding to your message, right? And so I wanted to ask about what type of data one can get from an email drive. I mean, I guess you can see who's opened it, but kind of what else creates value there on the back end?
I mean, I think you see a lot of different data points from email. You can certainly see who opens. You can see who clicked on whatever you asked someone to do. You can see which link they clicked on, if they're either capturing them right away in the message, or if they have to read all the way through to really dive in. You can see if once they land on the page that you're driving them to, whether they actually take the action that you asked of them. You can see, if they do fill out a donation form, for instance, suddenly you also have, the rest of the information they've shared with you. You've got their name, their address, the community that they've lived in. And I think the best email campaigns leverage the ability to sort of refer back to that ongoing experience through the course of their message. So you will see a lot of good political email that offers all kinds of personalization points, right? So like the greeting right up front, it's like, hey, Matt. But further down, it's like, you made a contribution at the last deadline day, and we need you to do the same this time. You've so far contributed $200 this election, and if you contribute $1 more, your name will get on the FEC report. There's ways that we sort of like talk about our work collectively that can have big outsized impacts. People want to be part of a success story, and email allows you to collect the data that can provide that kind of experience. You can tell that story. You can say 3,237 people from Hillsborough, North Carolina have contributed to this campaign, and we need 3 more people to do it. Will you be one of them? And that kind of sort of feedback loop, the data input when someone shares information with you, and the reference back to it when you've sort of analyzed and drawn insights from that process, I think are what really at the heart of the best email programs. And one of the ways that that channel sort of stands apart from a lot of the other ways that campaigns have to talk to their supporters.
And that's just such a fundamental shift from direct mail, right? Where you have to produce one leaflet for the whole group.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, I think early in the days of sort of online new media campaigning, as it was called, when it first kicked off, direct mail was the best analog. And a lot of the initial insights and sort of initial hypotheses for how to do that work well came from that world. And so you'd see stuff like the ask string, get 5, 10, 25, or even $100 today. You'd see, copy that looked like the piece of direct mail that would land in your physical mailbox with lots of bolded underlined sentences. And, I think some of that has continued to be useful. But one of the things that I'm sort of been interested by and encouraged by is there's sort of two trends in email right now that are really, really cool. There's much more sort of personalized messaging that looks just like a message that you and I would send back and forth to maybe schedule this interview. Or there's stuff that draws insights from what a lot of brands are doing that uses, big imagery and the sort of like native fonts and colors of a particular brand that really help an organization stand out. And tell a visual story that, if someone's looking at a message on their phone, they can scroll through really quickly and just process the point right away. And those things just, wouldn't happen necessarily over direct mail. And it's another way that we've sort of seen the conversation evolve and in some ways like become more meaningful and sort of richer for the person at the end of the message, the recipient, the actual individual supporter.
Yeah, that's interesting in terms of the visual aspect, which is also moving kind of social media as well. It's a picture's worth 1,000 words.
Well, the other thing that's interesting is that it's a really crowded marketplace, right? There are a lot of well-intentioned organizations doing incredibly important work who are asking the same pool of activists and volunteers to contribute their time, contribute their money, even just to pay attention. And the beauty of that kind of like visual message over email is that you can stand out in a crowded inbox. You can know at a glance this came from a brand and an organization that I'm already invested in, that I already trust. And I know that because I know that logo, I know those colors, I know those fonts. And you don't have to do the sort of like mental equation in your head. It's like, wait, who is this from? What are they asking me about? You just immediately have that trust built in right away. And that's such a good place to start when you need someone to do something to achieve an outcome that you both believe in.
Interesting. I love how these how fine-grained that thinking gets. And I want to move into picking apart a bit the kind of different spheres that you've worked in. And I guess I'll start broad and then start funneling in, what's the difference or similarities in working for an advocacy campaign, working with more political organizations, whether that's a campaign, an institution, a party? Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's one split, and then I want to get into more the political side in a second.
Yeah, so I think the biggest split is often between campaigns and sort of the other sort of advocacy groups, or even the opportunity to work in the White House. On a campaign, I know day by day, even hour by hour, whether what I'm doing is helping us achieve the things that are important for us to achieve in order to win an election day or hit our fundraising goal before deadline or recruit the number of volunteers that we need to have a successful get out the vote event. And I can watch that happen in real time and course correct if we're not hitting the numbers that we need. I can get a new test in the field. I can send another round of messages. I can, give people an update. Like, we're behind schedule on recruiting for this event and we need more people to show up. It's tougher when you're at the White House or you're working for an advocacy group and your goal is to tell the story of the president's policy accomplishments or build support for a piece of legislation or report back on the investments that supporter communities help to provide in terms of research. There are lots of interesting ways that you can go about that work, and digital still provides you with the opportunity to analyze a bunch of data and draw insights from it. But the feedback loop is so much more immediate in the electoral space. And that's important because you have a much more finite timeline.
Mm-hmm.
You know that election day is coming, and you're going to run out of time eventually. In fact, time is the most precious commodity on a campaign, where if you were working for one of these groups that's going to be around year after year because the mission is going to continue and not go away, that in some ways gives you more freedom to take bigger risks, to try more things, but you don't get the immediate satisfaction of knowing whether or not what you're doing is working.
And why is that? I'm thinking, comparing working for the White House and working for a presidential campaign, wouldn't the same tools be at play, or is it because the machine is bigger in the campaign versus the White House, or why can't you get that immediate feedback?
I think it's because the mission is a little bit more amorphous in the campaign. It's like, I can measure if we put together an incredible video that tells the story of what the Affordable Care Act is going to do. I can measure how many people have watched it. I can even get some insights into who those people are, but I cannot know, at least in the moment, whether that is achieving the goal of like helping more people support the law or be interested in signing up for the healthcare exchanges when they open a year from now.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are just tougher to let. They're less tangible. If I need to raise $128,000 in the 12 hours before midnight on the last day of the month, that is tangible. That is immediately knowable. And you can, again, watch those results moment by moment and shift course if you're not on the mark to hit them. So I think that's the sort of biggest difference. Campaigns give you a set of very clear milestones and guideposts in your work. Whereas when your goal is to tell a story that builds support around an idea, then it's tougher. Mm-hmm. And both are equally valuable experiences. Both are worth doing. I am so privileged to have had the chance to build a career that gives me the opportunity to do both things. But campaigns give you that sort of immediate satisfaction.
And I guess there's also an element of there's just so much hype around it in the media. People are kind of politically charged, whereas the Affordable Care Act is a little bit less sexy than the battle between two frontrunners.
But I think we saw that there was a ton of energy in the fight for protecting the Affordable Care Act in 2017. So it is it is driven by the moment, and I think it's also driven by the impact that people see in their daily lives. The campaign makes that spends a lot of time, spends a lot of human capital trying to figure out the best way to tell that story to be compelling. But I think what we saw last year is that once people recognized that, or once people were able to sign up for healthcare and begin to enjoy the benefits of it and not have to worry about coverage for their loved ones who had pre-existing conditions, suddenly that became immediate and tangible for them as well.
So since we're kind of dancing around these topics, I wanted to ask, because you were at the White House at a pretty interesting point in terms of digital communication. In terms of President Obama sort of leading the charge in terms of setting up the POTUS account, adopting Instagram. Can you give us a bit of insight into how that was on the inside? Like, what was the kind of motivations behind it? Was it I'm thinking about Trump and Twitter. I mean, the way he uses it is whatever, but that's kind of looked down upon by a lot of people, whereas Obama was sort of, everyone was kind of behind that White House communications push. So could you just kind of go into your experience there?
Yeah, I think it's not the what when you compare the ways that our past two presidents have, decided to embrace this medium, it's the how. I think the idea that the President of the United States should have the mechanisms to speak directly to the American people and voters all across the country and be able to engage in a conversation with them is a powerful one and like a really important development in sort of our story as a democracy. And I think the what there is wonderful and good. I think the how is really important, and there's the way that those two leaders have gone about their business couldn't be more fundamentally different. I think that's the reason why you see a lot of criticism around the way that President Trump uses Twitter as compared to the way that President Obama uses Twitter. One was careful and thoughtful and, use the medium to like elevate the conversation or show empathy or help people better understand complicated ideas, and the other does the opposite. But when I got to the White House, the team there was sort of in the midst of, its evolution. There had not been a digital team prior to Barack Obama assuming the presidency. George W. Bush had a couple folks whose job that was, who were part of their sort of press operation, and they were supposed to keep WhiteHouse.gov updated and all that good stuff. The experience of the 2008 campaign, the sort of identity that President Obama had as an organizer who put a great deal of faith in his ability to talk to people and sort of communicate with them, made space for a lot of experimentation around how to use those channels to accomplish the mission of talking to people. I think I've got one more point I think I should make on this question. We also saw an evolution happen in the media, where over the course of maybe the past 20 years, but accelerating through the Obama presidency, you saw a great deal of fragmentation occur in sort of traditional press. Audiences could go to any number of additional sources to hear a message and to sort of stay informed. And what those social channels allowed us to do in the White House was to have the president sort of talk directly to folks without the sort of filter, without the translation from a disjointed, fragmented press. And obviously, we still put a ton of time trying to think through how to use those channels to get reporters to talk about stuff that was perhaps less sexy than a horse race political story. It's not as if those things weren't important. It's not as if the media isn't an incredibly valuable institution. It's just that we needed, in this sort of current moment, to supplement our communications efforts by going directly to people through those channels.
Yeah, I think it's interesting kind of filling that niche when we have also all of these alternative news sources coming up as well online.
And like one example on that front, after one of the absolute toughest days that I had in that job was the school shooting at Sandy Hook. And I was actually at my little sister's college graduation and sort of saw that news as we stepped out of the ceremony, and watched my email sort of explode as updates came in. And it was hard in part because I wasn't there with my team trying to figure out like how do we approach this? How can we offer comfort? How can we think about what a policy solution is? But one of the things that happened, we had created this platform called We the People, which allowed anyone to create a petition, get people to sign it, and if they reached a certain threshold number of signatures, we guaranteed to deliver a response. And what we saw is that anytime the national conversation focused on a particular issue, that became an outlet for people to engage. And the moment after Sandy Hook was no different. And there was a moment where folks were sort of calling for better gun safety measures, and folks were saying anyone who talks about implementing any sort of gun control measure whatsoever should be impeached. And you saw all of that sort of energy make its way into the platform, and people creating petitions on both sides. But Alex Jones and his radio show said that Pierce Morgan should be deported because of his own statements about gun control, and got his sort of radio listeners to go to We the People and fill out a petition to that effect.
The InfoWars crew.
Yeah, exactly. And we watched that happen and had some really interesting conversations in the office, because we realized that what those people were sort of giving us an opportunity for was to start a conversation. The folks who signed that petition were suddenly welcoming a direct response from the White House that laid out the president's position. And it was a chance for us to say directly, like, the president supports the Second Amendment, but he does think there are ways to institute laws that would make us all safer, that would make it easier for people who need treatment to receive it for mental illness, that would make our schools safer. And we were able to have that conversation directly with an audience that we probably would never be able to reach. And, I still think that there's a ton of potential in that idea. And, the petition platform on the current version of whitehouse.gov, We the People still sort of exists. But I hope that whoever comes after this president returns to that opportunity, because I do think that, the more we do to open up our government, the more we do to sort of begin those conversations and trust people's best intentions, the more we can do to sort of restore some of the norms that we've seen get torn down in the 2 years of this presidency. And the better off we'll be as a sort of small d democracy.
Yeah, and I mean that as a lighter example, I used to read We the People all the time, and I remember I signed up for one to abolish the penny, and I got enough signatures, and I thought it was a great platform, and again, using digital tools to improve democracy.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one more question about the different spaces you worked in, and that's I think something that's quite unique to First Past the Post system, where you have a central party and then you have a bunch of people campaigning under it. And so you worked at the Democratic National Committee and also for different campaigns. So I wonder, what's the difference between working as a sort of official party communication consultant or campaigner and then actual working for campaigns? Is there a difference there?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is that you have a principle. And on a campaign, the candidate is ultimately the arbiter of what the message is and who you're trying to reach. And, the person who gets to decide and sort of steer the campaign in the direction that she wants. When you represent the entire party and you need to speak to the full, cohort of people who identify as Democrats, you sort of have to take into account what that means across an ideological spectrum, across a policy preference spectrum, across a even sort of like generational messaging like preference spectrum, and it makes the job it makes it tougher to be sometimes definitive when you are trying to speak for the party at large. But there's value there in being able to work on a longer timeline too. Again, on a campaign, that election day is coming, and you throw all of your efforts and every bit of energy you have into producing the best possible results before that second Tuesday in November. The Democratic Party is the oldest political party in the world, and it's not going to go away after any one election. It's going to persist and continue to move forward in its mission. And so even if it presents challenges, speaking to the entire country and sort of representing what it means to be a Democrat to a number of people who may not agree on what that idea is, you have the chance to work over a timeline that stretches out into years, or if you're ambitious enough, into decades. And there are tons of like Venn diagram overlaps between those two jobs and what they require, but I think the timeline thing is perhaps the most interesting.
Yeah, taking this longer term view. And do you think that the online communication, kind of speaking directly to the people, has a role in shaping that ideology as well, or kind of consolidating it around certain issues that the party wants to present?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. And I think in part because you're able to have a conversation, you can hear directly from people that these are the issues that are important. You can know what it is that your core sort of diehard, self-identified Democrats who carry a membership card in their wallet actually believe, and what it is that's going to motivate them. And you can think about how to sort of tailor a message that speaks to those values and really motivates those people, even as you're also sort of thinking through, how to persuade more people to join that camp.
So now that we've covered a lot of different sectors that you've worked in, and apropos a long-term view, 2005, you sort of got into the sort of digital side, and here we are, 2018. What are the biggest changes, you think? Or is the set of core principles still the same?
Yeah, I think the set of core principles are still the same. You are trying to widen the pool of people that you're trying to reach. You're trying to spark conversations. You're able to talk to people at scale. And we thought a lot about what a privilege that was to be able to reach millions of people at the push of a button from some of the first campaigns that, at least the first national operations that I started working on. And that certainly holds true to today. But I think one of the trends that's so interesting, and one of the things that I've been watching with as much attention as I can, is how there are new technologies emerging that allow us to have more one-to-one conversations, continue to do that at scale, but to use something like SMS and text messaging, which is an intimate experience comparatively, to reach people again where they are, and to ask questions, to break through in some cases. People pay a lot of attention to the text messages that they receive. And I just think that holds a ton of potential for the folks who want to build good organizing programs headed forward into the next election, certainly into this fall. But as we look ahead to 2020, I think that's going to be some of the heart of some of the best programs that we see people run.
So do you think, is that sort of where campaigning is going? I'm sort of getting that sense from different organizations that I've been talking to, is that people will check their notifications on WhatsApp, or they'll close out a text message, whereas they might not open an email. So is it going more into this mobilizing peers to talk to peers?
Yeah, I think that is certainly one big trend. And we need to do as we've done with other channels, figure out what the best practices are, figure out how to be effective, figure out how to not spoil the opportunity that sort of technology represents by taking advantage of people's attention. But I have a ton of optimism about what that sort of that kind of conversation represents. Now, it's also worth saying that the other channels aren't going to go away. We'll still use email, we'll still use Facebook, we'll still use Twitter or YouTube and everything else, because again, the best programs that we can design are ones where we're sort of meeting people at various touch points throughout the course of their day.
So I want to kind of pivot off that and pick your brain a bit about the midterms coming up. I guess, first of all, is that already started, or are you guys kind of, we're sort of recording mid-June, still a ways away, but these are long-term operations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you've seen the current version of the Democratic National Committee adopt the motto that every Tuesday is election day, because it is true. We're in the middle of primary season for states all over the country, and there are important decisions being made about who will represent the party, or who will ultimately hold a seat in races up and down the ballot all over the country, literally every week. So we're 100% in the middle of that. And smart campaigns are right now using this moment in the summer to build the infrastructure, to recruit the volunteers, to develop the sort of models they need to have that sprint when it comes. But the folks who aren't doing those things won't be able to catch up, is what I think.
And how do you actually decide which candidates you're going to work with? Do you go through the DNC? Do they come to you? Do you go to them? How does that kind of formation work?
Yeah, I think, so it's important to say the DNC doesn't pick, horses to back in individual primary races. And so there are consulting firms and agencies all over town who are working for candidates in primary, and sometimes those battles get pretty heated, and that's fine. That's like the nature of the way our process works, and it is good for people to try different approaches in these primary campaigns, and it is good for folks to have to work to win the party's nomination. So I don't think that there's anyone who's been in this business who wouldn't recognize that there's value in sort of seeing a lot of different effort go into winning these kinds of races. We as an agency actually, let's start here. We have two sides of our business. We develop a set of online organizing tools that are used by literally hundreds of campaigns all over the country. And there are plenty of moments where both candidates in a primary will be using BSD tools to reach their supporters and mobilize their activists and volunteers. And that's a good thing, because the more people we have using the platform, the better we develop a set of understandings, the more sort of features we can test and improve and optimize for the future. That's part of the business. We're only going to work with progressives, but that's our only real qualifier on that sort of thing. On the agency side, we've got to be sort of more intentional about who we support and who we work with directly. There will be plenty of, I think, folks across the office who, will vote different ways on, the individual primaries in their states. But I think we're looking for candidates who sort of share a sense of values that we sort of represent.
Yeah, I'm sure the office politics gets interesting around here. But I wanted to ask a bit about the recent controversies around data privacy and questions around regulation, fake news, these types of things. Do you think that the internal steps that tech platforms are taking at the moment is enough to meet these concerns?
I think those steps are evolving, and we do not yet know even what the final version of them are going to be. So I think it's tough to answer that question. It's tough to say, these are going to have a big impact, and we can all feel more confident and secure that that's not going to happen. I think it's also important to sort of separate out the various kinds of ways that the influence operation in the 2016 campaign unfolded. There was fake news, and that was one sort of concentrated tranche of the Russian program. There was a concerted effort to hack the emails of staffers at the DNC and staffers on the Clinton campaign, and then an operation to leak the results of that hacking at strategic times. Separate apart, there was an effort to penetrate the online databases of any number of electoral boards and polling places all over across the country. And that effort, it seems, was less successful than the first two. But I think what we have to do is be very clear-eyed about the idea that there's no one set of fixes that can confront all of those problems. And I think we should also be sort of realistic about the fact that we have more than one set of adversaries in this world as a country. And we cannot expect that the only threat to our sort of like democratic process to look exactly like what we saw in 2016. It may be that another government tries to interfere. It may be that a group of non-government actors decides like this is a great way to achieve some sort of aims that we have. It may be that poorly intentioned campaigns decide that they can exploit a set of advantages that way, and we have to confront the possibility that like our sort of laws that govern the way that our own citizens interact with the campaign process are insufficient. We just don't know. And I think that's the sort of Pandora's box that was opened by 2016. And so I think that there are some positive steps that the tech platforms are taking, but I just think it sort of ignores the broader point if we focus on those and say, like, is that going to solve the problem? Because clearly they're not. Even if it solves one part of the problem, which I'm pessimistic about, there's still all of these other threats that we need to be aware of. And I think the biggest thing that campaigns can do, and that we are seeing some effort and attention being paid, but probably not enough, is to sort of secure their own operations.
And it leads right into my next question, which is about phishing, because you've worked with email and you were right there with the hacks unfolding on the DNC. What can campaigns do to manage that threat? Because I think while I agree we don't really know what might happen in 2018, those sort of phishing attacks are a recurring sort of method that's being used.
Yep. First of all, there are a ton of good technical steps that campaigns could and should have their staffers take. Some of it's obvious, like at a minimum, two-step verification, and using an email platform that is, a personal, like, inter-office communication email platform that is modern and secure, and having either a dedicated information technology staffer on your campaign team, or turning to the sort of national party infrastructure and saying, like, okay, DNC, or okay, if you're a congressional campaign, DCCC, what are the steps I need to take? What are the best practices here? We're going to be lean. We're not going to have a big team. I can't afford to hire someone to be in charge of information security, but I'm going to look to you. What are the ways we can make sure this is secure? I think that's a really important sort of thing. Just like the technical hardware that you have in place, and the sort of steps that you mandate. I think there's also an education thing that needs to happen. We did a ton of trainings at the DNC and on the campaign to guard against phishing, to make sure that, like, people were aware of it as a threat. And even though we were thinking about it, like, we still saw, people have questions. And so I think we've got to be even more consistent about providing people with a firm understanding of what the threats are and how they unfold and what they might look like, so that when the time comes and all of a sudden a threat presents itself, we immediately recognize what that is, and just know to alert the right person on our team and ignore whatever the sort of query and the threat actually was.
All right, now moving in, last two questions for you. One is, because talking about social media, there's been some pretty big changes since 2016. I think 2016 was kind of the first election with Instagram and Snapchat kind of in there. And even just, in the year and a half since then, we've had these changes to Facebook's algorithms, prioritizing friends, Snapchat kind of losing market share a bit, don't really know where it's at, Twitter picking up users. How do you see social media factoring into the midterms? Building on the experience from 2016, is it going to play more of a role, less of a role? Is there a sort of fatigue there? Or how do you see it?
That's a good question. And the honest answer is that I think campaigns are going to need to experiment and try a lot of different things, because, as you say, there have been a bunch of changes instituted already, and we've already seen shifts in audience attention. And so the hypotheses that we thought we answered in 2016 may no longer be relevant in 2018. But that is one of the things that I love about working in sort of digital politics. It constantly offers the opportunity to retest old assumptions, to think back about the things we think we know, and make sure and verify that they remain true. And so I think that ethos, which should be, like a just like attitude that every digital staffer has to adjust, is one that we're just going to have to apply with even more rigor to the sort of mediums of social media and this election, because we just don't know yet what some of those changes are actually going to mean for the programs that we run.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing experiment, which is exciting. And kind of stepping back from a party politics standpoint, there's been so much talk about, the Democratic wave in 2018, which kind of plays in. We had Tea Party. Now it's sort of Democrats coming back, against whoever the sort of sitting incumbent is in the White House. How do you see, what is the party doing digitally to kind of capitalize on this momentum and mobilize voters?
So Jason Kander, who ran for the Senate in Missouri in 2016, who now leads an organization sort of helping people get access to the ballot box, has this quote that I particularly like, talking about this year's election. And he says, the blue wave is not a weather event. It's not something that's just going to happen naturally. Like, we have to go out and work for it. We have to make that potential future a reality if it's actually something we want to achieve. And so I think that, like, we as a sort of progressive movement absolutely have to adopt that attitude in full. I think, in 2016, we saw folks look at polling and sort of see the two candidates beside each other on the debate floor and, tell themselves a story that one was a future president and one was a reality TV star, and that there was no reason why they should stress or worry about the outcome, and they could sort of just step back and relax, and things would naturally unfold in a way that, was inevitable. And that moment, that on election day, when we realized that wasn't true, should just linger in the backs of all of our minds. We should constantly say we can't take this stuff for granted, because if we do, we will lose. And so I think first and foremost, regardless of where you work on a campaign, regardless of whether you're a staffer working 80 hours a week or a volunteer who's just coming in on the weekends, like that's got to be your ongoing mission, your sort of like slogan for this campaign. We will take nothing for granted. The blue wave is not just a thing that's going to happen. Yeah, we've got some really good evidence to suggest that our sort of core activist community, our people who identify as like Democratic voters, are excited and ready to show up in this election. There have been really positive trend lines, like the numbers of young people registering to vote in places like Florida and North Carolina are way, way up. All of that is great. But if we are not reinforcing that momentum, if we are not constantly asking ourselves, what are the things we can do to support the candidates that we believe in, I think that the election that happens this year will not unfold in a way that we want. The other thing I think we'll see, need to sort of just be very cognizant of, is that the hill we have to climb is pretty damn steep. We could hold our own in the Senate, pick up 20 seats in the House, and that would be a good election in any other year, but it would literally not change anything. The Republicans would still hold the majority in both chambers, and the president would stay the president on January 2019. And I think if that were the outcome, we as a party would feel awfully bad about it. So I think knowing that we need to work to sustain and build upon momentum, and recognizing that the challenge ahead of us is a very, very, very big one, are the two most important things that we can do on any sort of campaign this year.
And is there any sort of, from the Blue State Digital side, are there any particular focuses in a platform or tools that is really going to sort of make that wave happen?
I think that's a great question. I think there are a lot of things that we can sort of use the intervening months between now and the fall to sort of test. And, again, because there have been so many changes, and because the audience of people who are engaged in this election may be different than some of the elections in the past, I think the best thing that we can do as an agency, the best thing we can advise our clients to do, and the best thing that campaigns can themselves do, are to spend the summer, to spend these months retesting some of those assumptions from past campaigns, really trying to ask fundamental questions with the communication they send out into the world that will inform their future program, to optimize and chase after the incremental gains of 2 or 3% on any one particular part of their program, so that when we get to the fall, when we get past Labor Day and everything counts all the more because time is running out, we know what the best practices are for this particular election.
Well, Matt, this has been super interesting, and I will let you go and test those assumptions and
Beautiful.
retest them. Beautiful. And thanks so much for taking the time out. It's been great.
Absolutely.
I've just been speaking with Matt Compton, Director of Advocacy and Engagement at Blue State Digital. And that's a wrap for this episode of the Social Media and Politics Podcast. Thank you again for tuning in. Next time, I'm going to be speaking with Anson Kay. He is a partner on the political team at GMMB. And we're going to be talking about how a political advertisement is crafted from concept to implementation, and also look ahead a bit into those 2018 midterms. So don't miss that. Subscribe to get it directly in your feed. Remember, you can always get in touch through Twitter at SMNP Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.